I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but here I am. My name's Steve, and I want to tell you all about how I found out my wife, Lisa, was cheating on me. We've been married for about 5 years, and honestly, things weren't perfect, but they weren't terrible either. We had our ups and downs like any couple, but I always believed we had a decent foundation. We both worked in the nonprofit world, me in logistics, and Lisa in program coordination for a food security initiative. We met through work, and I guess that's part of what makes this so damn confusing. Lisa was always a bit bitchy, honestly. She'd throw her attitude around like she was the boss of everything, and she loved to lie about small stuff, about where she was, who she was with, even what she ate for lunch. I used to think it was just her, that maybe she was just wired to be a little manipulative or defensive. But then, little signs started popping up that something was off. She'd come home late, always with some excuse about meeting with the team, dealing with a crisis, or running an errand. But her phone was glued to her hand more than ever, and she'd be quick to hide it if I looked her way. That was fine at first. I figured it was just work, or maybe she was stressed. But then I noticed her mood changing. She'd get defensive when I asked questions, and once I caught her deleting texts in a hurry, that's when it clicked that something was seriously wrong. Still, I kept dismissing it because I didn't want to believe she'd cheat on me. I'd never suspected her of doing anything shady. She was always the one pushing for honesty for a good marriage. So I tried to brush it off, convinced I was just paranoid. But then last week, I got a hit of something that made me question everything. I was snooping around her laptop, something I hate to admit, but I was desperate. It was the only way I could figure out what was going on. I found emails and calendar invites that made my stomach turn. There were planning meetings listed under distribution planning, scheduled at luxury resorts near refugee camps. I looked at the dates. She'd been away almost every weekend, taking these trips that I didn't even know about. And the emails were from a guy named Mark, an obscure consultant she'd told me she was working with, but the tone of those emails was way too intimate. They talked about strategy, but I could see the way she signed off. Can't wait to see you again and lunch tomorrow. I felt sick reading it. When I confronted her about it, she instantly went on the defensive, rolling her eyes and dismissing it as work stuff that I was reading too much into. She called me paranoid, said I was insecure and jealous, and that Mark was just a friend she'd been working with for months. She even said I was overreacting, that I was making a big deal out of nothing. But I knew better. Something about her attitude changed after that. She started lying more, getting even bitchier when I pressed her, and she'd throw in little digs about how I was trusting too much or not understanding her job. It was like she was trying to gaslight me into believing I was crazy for suspecting her. I felt so many things at once: anger, betrayal, confusion. How could she lie so easily? How could she cheat with some guy she met at some luxury resort? And worse, how long had it been going on? I kept thinking about those weekends and those meetings. I wanted to punch her or scream at her, but I just kept quiet for a while, trying to process what I'd discovered. The shock was overwhelming. I mean, you think you know someone, and then suddenly it feels like your whole world's been turned upside down. I don't know if I was in denial or just refusing to believe it, but I kept telling myself I'd catch her in the act somehow. I needed proof. I needed to know for sure what was happening, and more importantly, what I was going to do about it. So, after that night when I found those emails and saw her brush off my questions like I was bugging her, I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I decided I had to catch her in the act, or at least get more concrete proof. I didn't want to believe she was cheating, but the signs were right there, screaming at me. I couldn't just ignore it anymore. I started paying closer attention, watching her every move, trying to see if she'd slip up again. And honestly, it felt like walking through a minefield, waiting for her to slip, waiting for something to drop. The next few days were relentless. She was acting even more distant and irritable, snapping at me over little things. Then she started leaving her phone around more often, leaving it on the counter when she was in the shower or even sleeping. I couldn't resist anymore. I grabbed her phone when she was asleep one night just to see if I could find anything else. I knew I was risking everything, but I had to know the truth. I unlocked her passcode, something I'd never done before, and found texts between her and Mark. The messages were more explicit now, talks about meeting up, how much they missed each other, and plans to see each other again at one of those resorts. It was clear. She was cheating and she didn't give a damn about my feelings. It hit me like a punch in the stomach. The next morning I felt numb. I stayed awake all night, reading those messages over and over, trying to process what this meant for us. I couldn't believe I was married to someone capable of this kind of betrayal, especially after all the promises and vows. I kept asking myself if I was just naive, if I missed signs, or if I was just blind to her true nature. I had a terrible sense of betrayal, but also a burning need for justice. I knew I couldn't just confront her without a plan. I had to be smart about this. When she finally woke up, I played it cool, acting like I didn't know anything. But inside, I was seething. I made a decision in that moment. I was going to confront her, but I'd do it on my terms. I had to expose her lies, make her own her betrayal, and then decide what to do next. This wasn't just about finding out she cheated. It was about how I was going to handle the fallout. I was hurt, furious, and ready for whatever came next. I didn't want her to get away with this, not without paying a price. I had to be the one to set things straight, and that meant planning my move carefully. The day I decided to confront her, I woke up with a knot in my stomach that just didn't go away. I knew I couldn't do it in the morning. She'd be too defensive, and I needed her at her most vulnerable. So I waited until late in the afternoon when she was supposed to be meeting with the team again. I kept checking her phone messages, her emails, anything that might give me a clearer picture of what I was about to face. I didn't want surprises, but I knew there'd be some anyway. Finally, she came home, looking tense but trying to act normal. I greeted her as casually as I could, but I could see the flicker of guilt behind her eyes. That's when I decided to pull the plug. I sat her down in the living room, took a deep breath, and told her I knew everything about Mark, about the trips, about the lies. I saw her face freeze, her bitchy mask slipping just a little. For a moment she tried to deny it, brushing it off with her usual sarcasm. "Oh, please, Steve. You're crazy. You're just jealous. This isn't what you think." But I was. Having it, I laid out the evidence, her emails, the texts, the calendar invites. I told her how I'd found her phone, how I'd seen the messages. Her reaction was priceless. She rolled her eyes, scoffed, and then threw on that fake "I don't give a damn" attitude. "So what if I did? It's not like I'm leaving you, Steve. You're just insecure, paranoid as usual." That's when the rage started bubbling over. I couldn't believe she was trying to turn this around, making me look like the crazy one. She was trying to gaslight me again like she did with everything else. I told her I wasn't buying it, that I'd had enough. I was done pretending I didn't see what she'd been doing. She started screaming, calling me possessive, jealous, and pathetic. She accused me of spying, of being insecure, and of ruining her career because I didn't trust her. Honestly, I'd never seen her like that before, so bitchy, so nasty. She was trying to turn it around on me, and I realized she didn't even care about the fallout. She just wanted to keep her little secret. I sat there, listening to her bullshit. And inside, I was more disappointed than anything. I'd married someone who didn't even respect me enough to be honest. After that, I just got up and walked away. I didn't want to yell or fight anymore. I knew what I had to do next. I wasn't going to let her get away with it, not without consequences. I felt a strange mixture of relief and heartbreak. Part of me wanted to scream at her, break everything, scream at the top of my lungs that I knew she'd been lying all along. But I held it in. I knew I needed to think, plan my next move, because this wasn't just about catching her cheating. It was about what I was going to do to protect myself and, honestly, to get some damn respect. That night I couldn't sleep. The betrayal kept echoing in my mind. I kept thinking about all the promises she'd broken, all the lies, all the times I'd trusted her and she'd lied right to my face. It's funny how love can blind you, how you convince yourself that maybe it's not as bad as it looks. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just a fling or a mistake. This was something planned, something calculated, and I was the fool for not seeing it sooner. Now I was stuck with the aftermath, trying to figure out how to pick up the pieces of a marriage that was already shattered. The days that followed were a blur of disbelief and anger. I couldn't even look at her without feeling this gnawing sense of betrayal. Every time I saw her face, I saw a liar. Every word she spat at me was like a thinly veiled attempt to manipulate her way out of the mess she created. I kept telling myself I needed to stay calm, that I had to think clearly about what to do next. But honestly, I was boiling inside, wondering how much more she could lie or twist things around. I started actively planning my next move. Part of me wanted to confront her again, to demand the truth straight out, but I also knew that wouldn't get me anywhere. She was good at spinning stories, so I decided to dig even deeper to gather more evidence, just in case I needed it later. I secretly installed a keylogger on her computer and monitored her messages. I also reached out to Mark, which was maybe the most impulsive thing I've ever done. I found his number in her contacts and I called him. The conversation was brief but revealing. Mark admitted that he'd been sleeping with Lisa for months, that they'd been close, and that she'd told him she was single. I could hear the guilt in his voice, but also the arrogance, like he thought he was entitled to her. That was the moment I knew I had to do something drastic. I couldn't just let her keep lying and sneaking around. I had to make her face the consequences of what she'd done. So I started plotting my revenge, not in some childish way, but a calculated plan to make her see what she lost. I decided to confront her again, but this time with a camera hidden somewhere in the house. I wanted her to see herself lying, to see how manipulative she'd become. I also called a lawyer for advice, because I wasn't about to let her walk all over me. I knew I had to stay sharp, stay focused, and prepare for whatever was coming next. I also realized I couldn't stay in this marriage, not with her lying and manipulating like this. Meanwhile, Lisa was still trying to keep her act together, acting like she was the victim, throwing around words like crazy, possessive, and overreacting. She'd throw tantrums, yell at me for accusing her of things she didn't do, and then cry crocodile tears that she was trying so hard to work and keep this marriage alive. I saw right through her. She was a master at playing the victim, but I knew the truth now. I'd seen her in her own words, in her own emails, and I wasn't going to be fooled again. Honestly, part of me felt numb. It was like I had to accept that the woman I loved, the woman I married, was capable of lying, cheating, and manipulating me. How did I get here? How did we get to this point where her betrayal was so blatant, and yet she still refused to own it? It's a strange mixture of heartbreak and anger. I was hurt, yes, but also furious that she'd throw away everything we had over some guy she'd meet at these stupid luxury resorts near refugee camps. I started questioning everything, whether I was blind, whether I'd missed the signs, or whether I was just too trustful. I knew I couldn't stay in that house much longer, not with her around. So I started packing some things, planning a quiet exit. I didn't want a messy scene, but I also didn't want her to think she'd won. I was gearing up for the ultimate showdown. Without her knowing, I was gathering all the ammunition I needed. It was clear to me now that this wasn't just a fling or some drunken mistake. This was a calculated betrayal, and I needed to handle it in a way that would give me some peace, even if it meant ripping everything apart first. As I packed my bags in the quiet of the night, I kept replaying everything: the lies, the emails, her bitchy dismissals. I felt like a fool for trusting her for so long, but I also knew I had no choice but to finalize this chapter. I had to get out, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. I couldn't keep pretending this was just a mistake or some lapse in judgment. Deep down, I knew she'd been planning her exit for a while, maybe even before she started the affair. I arranged for a friend to pick me up early the next morning so I wouldn't be around for her to start her manipulative games. As I waited in the dark, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief mixed with dread. I was finally taking control of the situation, even if it meant ending something I thought was real. I'd already made up my mind. I was done with lies, with betrayal, with her bitchy attitude and constant gaslighting. I wanted to leave her to deal with the fallout, to face herself in the mirror, knowing she'd been caught. When I finally left, I didn't look back. As I drove away, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, but also an ache in my chest. I knew she'd try to spin everything, as she always did, but I didn't care anymore. I had all the evidence I needed, and I was going to use it. I contacted a lawyer that same day, laid out everything I'd uncovered, and prepared to file for divorce. I also decided to send her a message, short, cold, and direct. I told her I knew about the affair about Mark and that I'd be terminating the marriage. If she thought she could manipulate her way out of this, she was dead wrong. Of course, she responded almost immediately. Her reply was classic Lisa, full of lies, accusations, and fake tears. She claimed she was sorry, that it was just a mistake, and that she still loved me. She begged me not to ruin everything, crying about how she was stressed and insecure and that Mark meant nothing. But I wasn't buying any of it. I could see right through her crocodile tears. I told her I knew exactly what she was doing, that I wasn't going to fall for her lies anymore. I told her I was done, that I documented everything, and that she couldn't manipulate her way out of this one. Now, sitting here writing this, I realize how much I've changed. I thought I knew her, thought we had something real, but it was just a facade. I learned that even people who seem bitchy and manipulative can be hiding secrets, and that trusting blindly is a surefire way to get hurt. I also learned that sometimes the only way to move forward is to cut ties completely. You can't fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed, and you can't keep living in the shadow of betrayal. Looking back, I don't regret catching her. It hurts like hell, but I needed to see her for what she really was. I needed to take control so I could start healing. Now I'm just waiting for the divorce to finalize, and honestly, I feel a strange sense of peace, like I'm finally free from her bitchy attitude, her lies, and her cheating. My advice to anyone out there dealing with a betrayal like this: trust your gut. Don't ignore the signs. And when you finally find out the truth, don't be afraid to walk away. You deserve better than someone who lies and manipulates their way through life. Trust me, being alone is better than being with someone who doesn't respect you enough to be honest. Since I left her, life been a different story. It's quiet now, no more constant fights, no more her bitchy attitude snapping at me for no reason. Honestly, at first it was just relief. I could finally breathe, without feeling like I was walking on eggshells. The house feels emptier but also lighter somehow. I've been focusing on myself, getting back into shape, reconnecting with friends I'd ignored, and just trying to rebuild my sense of self that she'd chipped away at over the years. I won't lie, the betrayal cut deep. I still have nights where I lie awake, replaying everything, wondering how I missed the signs or why I trusted her in the first place. But each day gets a little easier. I've learned a lot from this experience. Mostly that nobody is immune to deception, and sometimes love isn't enough to keep a relationship alive if honesty doesn't exist at its core. I used to think that if someone loved you enough, they'd never hurt you like this. Turns out that's not always true. People are complicated, and some will do whatever it takes to hide their lies, even from themselves. Looking back, I realize I was blinded for a long time. I let her bitchiness, her lies, her manipulative ways slide because I was too scared to face the truth. I thought I could fix her, change her, or maybe that she'd come around. But that was a mistake. I finally accepted that some people don't change, and trying to hold on to something that's already broken just makes it worse. Trust is earned, and once it's shattered, it's almost impossible to put back together. That's a lesson I'll carry with me forever. Now I've started to rebuild my life. I don't hate her anymore, at least not the way I did when I first found out. I just feel sorry for her, honestly. Sorry that she couldn't be honest, that she chose some guy at a luxury resort over her marriage, over her integrity. I hope she gets her act together someday, but I know I can't be part of that journey anymore. I've learned that I deserve respect, loyalty, and honesty, things she couldn't give me, no matter how much I wanted to believe differently. This experience taught me to be more cautious, more aware of the signs, and most importantly, to value myself. I won't let myself get blindsided again. I've started focusing on my career, on my friends, on my hobbies, the things that make me happy outside of a relationship. Honestly, I don't regret what happened because it's made me stronger. It's pushed me to reevaluate what I want and what I refuse to tolerate. I don't need someone like her in my life, someone who lies, manipulates, and cheats just to satisfy her own ego. So, to anyone out there who might be going through something similar, trust your instincts. Don't ignore the red flags. no matter how much you want to believe it's just a rough patch. And if you find out someone you love has been lying or cheating, don't be afraid to walk away. It hurts initially, but in the long run, you'll thank yourself for having the courage to end something toxic. You deserve better. You deserve honesty, respect, and someone who values you for who you are, not for what they can hide or manipulate. That's the lesson I've learned the hard way. And honestly, it's one I'll never forget.